Alright guys, we are back in my garage for another video, and today we are going to be talking about Dragy times. This is especially for those of you that see people post up crazy Dragy times and you're just wondering, if my setup is similar to theirs, why am I not able to achieve the times that they are? There are a lot of different things that can affect your Dragy times, and so in this video I just kind of want to share my findings, especially now that I'm upgrading my turbo. I did a lot of testing on the stock turbo, and I want to hopefully help you guys figure out the best settings and way to drive your car to get the best times possible, even on just a basic stock turbo setup. So we'll talk about all of that in this video, and hopefully you guys find it useful. Now, as always, for everybody that's new to the channel, I create these videos to help keep you updated on the latest developments in our community, as well as discuss technical topics so that we have a better understanding of how our engines work. So if you're interested in more videos like that, be sure to subscribe because there will be a lot more coming out in the future. Now, before we jump into this, I do want to help you guys out that have been asking me, what is a Dragy? How does it work? How do I get these overlays for my videos and things like that? And Dragy is pretty simple. So this is what it is. It's just a little small device. And what it can do is measure your car's performance based off of GPS data. So it's basically using satellites to figure out how fast your car is going, and it uses that data to tell you things like 0 to 60, quarter mile time, 60 to 130, basically any metric that you might want to know. Now, the good news is these are at a pretty good price, so I will put a link down in the description if you guys are interested in buying them. And it's just a really good tool to measure the performance on your car, especially I know some of you guys said that my car is feeling slower. How can I figure out what's wrong? And if you're maybe considering your butt dyno might be out of calibration, this is a much better tool to consistently tell if different parts and changes that you make to your car is actually making it faster or slower. And some free game for anybody that has a Dragy on our cars. It's really easy to mount because they are magnetic, and we have a nice metal speaker grill right on top of our dash. So you can literally just set it right on top of there and it'll hold it strong. It won't move around, and that gives it a clear view of the sky through the windshield. So it'll get some good GPS signal. So very cool to use. Again, I'll have a link down in the description in case you guys are interested in ordering your own. But now let's go ahead and talk about our Dragy time. So there are a lot of different things that you can do to get the best times possible. And first of all, we'll start with the things and the information that Dragy gives you directly in the app. So if you look at the top of a Dragy slip after you've gotten your time, you can see 3 different metrics. You can see the temperature, your elevation, and your DA. And DA is the absolute most important one out of all 3 of these. And basically it's measuring the air density relative to an altitude scale. So this is something that engineers created primarily for aviation because pilots need to be able to determine the right settings and way to drive their planes depending on the actual air density. So they created this scale that said, this air density is going to be correlated with this altitude, and that's what it tells you. So it's not a perfect scale because air density changes for a lot of different reasons, but it is something relative. So if I have a lower DA than you, my air is more dense than yours. And that's basically the main takeaway from here. You want the lowest DA possible to get the best times possible. So that means you're going to have low temperature and high air pressure so that you can get as much air into your engine as possible, and that'll give you optimal performance. If you're at a high elevation or you're experiencing high DA, then that means the temperatures are higher and the air pressure is lower, which means the air is more thin and it's going to have to work harder to make the same amount of power. So I have a whole separate video on that I made several years ago if you guys are more interested in understanding DA and how it's calculated and all of that good stuff. But suffice it to say that a lower DA is better. And that's usually the first thing I recommend. If you see somebody with a faster time, compare the DA. If it's lower than yours, that's probably a big contributor to why their times are faster. Also, slope is a big one as well, and a lot of people get a lot of heartburn over seeing people drive on a negative slope, and that's just kind of a part of the game. Even if you look at NHRA rules, FIA rules, for a drag strip, you're allowed to have up to a negative 1% slope, and that's the same rules that Dragy goes by. So as long as it's greater than negative 1% slope, basically a 1% downhill, you're going to be okay, and it's going to show your times as valid. Now, you do want to just keep in mind there are some other things that can make your times invalid depending on how many satellites you're able to get. Sometimes you'll see like blips in the Dragy where it doesn't get consistent signal. Maybe you went under a bridge or something like that. And so there are a lot of people that will argue about whether a time is valid or not, even outside of Dragy's stamp of approval. So we're not going to talk about that so much in this video, but just keep in mind that can create some variation as well. And you really want to be able to drive on the flattest road possible, completely clear with no bridges or obstacles that can prevent you from getting a nice good signal for the whole pull. So after hearing all that, your first thought is probably, okay, I just need to find the lowest DA possible, negative if it's available, get a nice downward slope that isn't more than -1 degrees, and I'll be able to get the fastest times possible. But if you look at my Dragy times, these are 2 times I got with the exact same setup, and you can see even though the temperature was colder, the slope was greater, the DA was lower, I still ran a slightly higher time. And I'm just showing this to illustrate that there are a lot of other things that can have an effect on your Dragy time as well. So one big one, of course, is the performance of your car. And I highly recommend running logs on your car to make sure that you're getting the best performance possible, especially for those of you that are running ethanol mixes, E30, 40, 50, whatever it might be. You want to make sure that you're running logs so that you know you're getting the best timing possible. A little bit of timing pull is normal. It's not necessarily dangerous, but it is making your car slower. So if you do see timing corrections, I recommend upping your ethanol content. As long as your fuel pressure is steady and your fuel system can handle it, it should give you much better performance, and that is going to give you the best times possible. So now that you've confirmed that your engine is running optimally, all systems are go, everything is healthy, now it's time to actually set up the run. And the first thing that you want to do is make sure that you're starting at the right starting speed, or that your start is optimized for you to get the best 60 to 130 possible. So of course you don't want to start right at 60 miles an hour and just floor it. A lot of people try to argue, oh, it's not real if you start at, 50 miles an hour, 45 miles an hour, that's not a real 60 to 130. And that's the same thing like saying if you brake boost on a launch or use launch control, then your drag run isn't real, right? You don't have to sit at the light and just floor it when the light turns green. You're allowed to load up the car to get the best leave possible. And it's the same thing for 60 to 130. If you start at a lower speed, if you brake boost, use anti-lag, whatever tools you have to make sure you're at your peak acceleration at 60 miles an hour, that will make sure that you get the best times possible. At the end of the day, this is a rolling start. This is more of a measure of power, and you want to try to avoid or eliminate any other variables that can slow the car down. So get the car rolling. I usually start around 50 miles an hour, and by 60, the car is full steam, pulling as hard as it can, and I can just let it continue through the rest of the pull. The next thing is your starting gear, and this depends on a lot of different factors. Most people start in 3rd gear because it gives you more torque, but this can also cause wheel spin. So a lot of times I start in 4th gear, especially if you're trying to find the best DA possible. Usually that means that the temps are colder, and if it's colder outside, then you're probably going to struggle with grip a lot more. So starting in 4th gear gives you better grip and makes sure that you still get good acceleration, and also it minimizes the number of shifts that you do, because even though your shifts are fast, even on a ZF8, your shifts are going to take a little bit of time and cause a little bit of a delay. So starting in 4th gear for me has always been one of the best ways to get the performance down. And now let's talk about shift points. So you got your starting gear, your starting speed, and you floor it. When are you going to shift? Now for me, on my car, I found that the stock turbo gets the best performance by shifting at around 6,000 RPM on a ZF 8-speed or 6,500 RPM on a 6-speed manual. The reason is because you want the car to stay in the power band as much as possible. The easiest way to visualize your power band is, of course, to get an actual dyno run, so I highly recommend that to anybody that wants to have a better understanding of how their car works. But there are some other things that you can look at in your tune, like torque and load, that can help you kind of visualize where your power band is. It's not necessarily going to be perfect, but it can give you some data to work with. But since I have a dyno run, you can look at the dyno to see exactly where my power band is. My peak power is right around 5,500 RPM. And as you go away from that before and after, you basically want to have an even spread so that you have the maximum amount of power throughout the entire shift. Now on a ZF 8-speed, the car typically drops around 1,000 RPM. So that's why shifting at 6,000 RPM seems to give me the best performance possible, because now it puts me right at 5,000 and it gives me that nice peak power band where the car is going to be the fastest. On my manual transmission, the gears are longer, so it usually drops around 1500 to 2000 RPM. So that's why I shift later. I shift around 6500 RPM on my stock turbo setup to get the best performance times. Now keep in mind, this really depends, especially the Gen 2 guys, you have a much stronger turbo that can run a lot more boost. And so even though it's not going to make a lot more top end power, you're going to make a lot more torque. And that can move your power band back and make it a lot more peaky. So I've seen people say that shifting at 5,500 RPM on some of these stock turbo Supras and M340i's actually gives them the best performance possible. Now they're pushing a lot of boost, they're pushing, maybe 600 plus foot-pounds of torque through the stock turbo, but all of that is going to give you a much better leave when you floor the car, and your power band's going to be much more focused higher up in the revs. So depending on your power band and what your dyno shows, that's how you're going to determine the best shift points for your car. Now, the last thing to consider is your final gear, basically where you want to end. And just a reminder again, every shift that your car does is going to be a slight delay that can make your car slower, especially in our case, because not only does it push you into an additional gear to get to 130 miles an hour if you're shifting at 6,000 RPM, but that's also shifting you into sixth gear, which is the most awkward shift on our car. We already know sixth gear is the weakest one, and it also has the longest shift. It feels the most delayed, it feels the most jarring. So I really try not to shift into sixth gear if at all possible. I try to just basically rev out fifth, and you'll be able to hit 130 before you hit red lines. So now let's take a look at some data that I captured on my car doing some testing on my stock turbo setup. Again, just as a reminder, this is a rear-wheel drive 340i with a ZF 8-speed, and it has a stock turbo with bolt-ons running E85 and Kelford Cams. So let's go ahead and look at some of my runs. The first one I did starting in third gear, and I shifted at 6,000 RPM, and I went all the way through fifth gear, but I revved it out. Like I said, I know I don't want to shift into sixth, so I got this time at 8.79 seconds. Then I ran it again, and I just wanted to see how much slower would it be if I shifted into sixth gear. So revving this one out, when it hit 6,000 RPM, I did another shift. Again, I felt it in the car, and it hit 8.91 seconds, so over a tenth of a second slower. So I went back to the original plan, and like I said, I'd like to start in fourth gear because at these temperatures, I typically lose a little bit of grip. You can see at the beginning it spins a little bit when I start in third. So I tried starting in fourth, and this time I was back at 8.79 seconds, but this was even shifting into sixth gear. So I decided to do one more run, starting in fourth so I have optimal grip, and revving out in fifth so I don't get that slow sixth gear shift. And that dropped my time to 8.77. And then the last run that I did, just for giggles, I went ahead and tried 5,500 RPM, even though my car isn't making that much boost. I was just curious if it would do anything for the times. And now I was back in the 8.9 range, so it absolutely did not work. Again, my car is only hitting around 21, maybe 22 PSI, depending on the conditions. And so this is nothing like some of you Gen 2 guys that are pushing 25 or some even 30 plus. So yeah, I do this on my car a lot, and this just kind of helps confirm that I have the right strategy of starting in fourth gear, shifting to fifth gear, and letting it rev out. That means that you're only shifting once, you're still keeping everything in the power band, and you're not having any extra drivetrain losses or anything from, shifting too much, being in the wrong gear, wrong RPM, and things like that. So I highly recommend trying this. Again, some people say that starting in third makes their car way faster. If you have better tires and more grip, it absolutely might work, but for me, this has always been the tried and true way to make it happen. So now you've got your car set up, the engine's running healthy, you know how to drive and get the best times possible, but it's still not as fast as the next guy. And there are still plenty of other variables that come into play. A huge one is weight. Just because somebody else says they have a 340i doesn't mean that it will be the same as my 340i. Mine is particularly heavy because it's basically a loaded M Sport package. So it's got the extra radiators, it's got the bigger brakes, all of these different things. And if I had a base model with the smaller brakes, some 17-inch wheels, no sunroof, and just like base interior, it would weigh a lot less than mine. And so that's something that you have to consider. All 340i's, all 440i's are not created equal, and depending on the options that you have, there could be a very significant difference in weight. Another thing, of course, is driver weight. You know, a lot of people used to say that one stock F30's times were artificially low because he's a smaller guy. And of course, he went back and doubled down, started doing times with passengers and stuff just to prove how fast his car actually was. But that is a significant advantage. You know, if you're a smaller person, you're going to have less weight in your car. If you're less than 150 pounds, me driving your car is basically going to double the driver's weight. So that's something that you guys have to consider. Not everybody's going to weigh the same. There are a lot of shorter guys, smaller guys, taller guys, bigger guys, and that's going to be a big variable. Just imagine if you have passengers in your car, that does change how your car is going to perform. So even just the driver weight can have an impact on that as well. Other things that can have an impact are weights like your wheels, your brakes. Like I said, if you have bigger brakes, that's going to make your car slow, especially because that's rotating mass. So when you floor it, that's going to be resistance from the car trying to accelerate. Those are things that can rob you from torque getting to the wheels. So if you can run smaller wheels, lighter brakes, all of that's going to help improve your performance. Even things like the weight of your fuel. If you guys see my Dragy times, I always try to run at less than a quarter tank, usually around 100 miles to empty, and that gives me the best times possible. I know a lot of people like to flex, oh, I made this time full weight, full tank of gas, towing 14 watermelons and all that stuff. But if you want to get your best times possible, you need to let that weight go. You need to run at a quarter tank, get the extra weight out of the car. Don't drive with passengers and stuff. This is like some of the most common things that I hear. Oh yeah, my buddy was with me and stuff. Well, yeah, that's going to have an effect on your times as well. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about are tires. A lot of people don't consider that tires have a huge impact on your grip, which also has a huge impact on your rolling resistance. So if you run really wide, really sticky tires on all four corners, that absolutely is going to slow down your 60 to 130 time. You might get a good 60 foot, a good 0 to 60, but once you're actually rolling, that can slow you down. And I see a lot of people saying, oh, I got these times on, 225 all season tires, as if that's something that should be slowing them down, when in fact, that's actually helping you out. Typically, all season tires are going to have less rolling resistance and they're going to accelerate more freely. And if the tires on your car are narrow, again, you're going to have less rolling resistance. So that's why you see like these Supras that have drag slicks in the back, they run little skinny tires up front because the front tires aren't doing anything. And all they want to do is minimize how much resistance they're getting from those front tires to make sure that their car can accelerate as quickly as possible. They still have to run a sticky tire on the back to get the grip they need to launch, but everywhere else, those front tires are going to be taken advantage of so that they don't have anything holding them back from getting the fastest trap speed. Another thing I've seen people do is just put extra air in their front tires. Some people run, a full-size wheel front and rear, but in the front, they run an all-season or like a Grand Touring tire, and then they just use the sticky tire in the rear. So a lot of different things work, and you might not be able to notice that because it just looks like a regular setup, but they're making these small changes so that their car accelerates as freely and as quickly as possible. So again, these are just some things that you can try to take advantage of to help improve your 60 to 130 times. So yeah, hopefully this explains some of like the main things I've seen people do to improve their Dragy times. Obviously there is a whole laundry list of things that you can change. If you have any secret sauce, feel free to leave a comment and let people know different tips and tricks on what they can do to improve their times. But yeah, this is why I don't really compare my times to anybody else. I know that every single car is different, driver's different, conditions are always different. So for me, it's only really important for me to compare my times to myself. Different things that I can test before and after are going to give me the best feedback possible so I know it's actually working to make my car as fast as possible. But even then, there are a lot of things that are out of your control, like, the weather and things like that. So just enjoy it, do what you can with what you've got. Hopefully, again, this gives you guys the information you need to make sure you're getting the most out of your car possible. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this video. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below.